Hello and welcome to the ET TV. I am Shipra Malhotra, Executive Editor for Special Initiatives at ET. Today, I am going to bring to you a guest who is a very senior cybersecurity leader, and we are going to be talking about a very interesting topic, which is confidential computing. Please welcome Dr. Nataraj Nagaratnam, IBM Fellow and Chief Technology Officer, Cloud Security for IBM. Welcome, Dr. Nataraj.
Thank you so much, Shipra. I'm glad to be here, and thanks for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you so much for joining for this episode. Now, to begin with, I want you to kind of demystify confidential computing for us, because if we really compare it to some of the other concepts in cybersecurity, like zero trust, it is not probably as well known or as widely talked about in the information security circles, especially in India. So if you can just demystify it for us in terms of what are the underlying principles of confidential computing and how is it different and better from some of the other approaches to security?
Absolutely. It actually complements, great question, because it's core part of, we believe it's a core part of the zero trust architecture, because zero trust is an architecture and the principles, whereas confidential computing is a technology. Let me use a real world use case, right? So when you write down your bank information, credit card information, passwords in a piece of paper and leave it somewhere, someone can steal it. That's a data at rest. If you put it somewhere in clear, somebody can steal it. But encryption technologies to do it at rest in a computer has been there for a while. When you send it over a courier to somebody else, somebody can steal it from there. If you're sending it in clear, within that, and if it's not secure, then someone can steal it also. And over the years with TLS and SSL technologies, that's addressed. But what happens if you are conversing with somebody, processing the data, talking about it in a room, and somebody else is able to snoop in and hear what you're saying? That's data in use. So in the computer paradigm, when applications are processing data, so think about credit card processing. When you're doing payments, your credit card information goes, and if the credit card payment processing app is actually doing it, it's in memory for a period of time when application is doing it. And if someone have access to the memory, compromise the memory at core dump, as we call it in the geeky space, if you dump the memory, then you can actually get to the data. That's kind of the last mile of data protection when you look at holistically, that was not solved until recently. Over the last 5 years, it has been in practice. So confidential compute in strict industry definition is about data in use. That said, one thing I want to point out is from an IBM perspective, we are actually taking it as a broader view that confidential computing is about data privacy holistically across at rest, in transit, and in use, where the customer can ultimately completely have the confidence that they have control of the data and nobody else can get to the data. That's the push that we are doing and the portfolio we have in the market.
Great. Thanks for putting it, in such a lucid manner, what exactly is confidential computing. Now, if you really look at the next generation of digital transformation that is happening in the new normal, it relies extensively on cloud, IoT, edge computing, and other digital technologies. So what are some of the new and upcoming security challenges for businesses as they move towards becoming digital first? And how can confidential computing help address these challenges and secure the digital systems against data breaches, identity theft, and new age frauds, which we are increasingly witnessing?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So when you think about, I mean, cloud is accelerating adoption, innovation, right? That's the transformation that's happening out there. At the same time, when you look at the data, at best, maybe 15 to 20% of the workloads have moved to cloud. 80% is still there. If you think about why, it's about all of them deal with confidential and sensitive data. Customers are not yet completely comfortable moving confidential sensitive data to the cloud. So data protection is one thing. The other challenge is ever increasing regulations. Every country is now focused on data privacy. As you very well know, in India and other places also, the data privacy laws and what we put on the service providers become stringent. From that perspective, the vendors are also struggling in terms of, and customers, to figure out how to serve their customers to meet the regulations on one side, and data privacy on another side. So this is where IBM, we have been spearheading in the context of industry-specific clouds, like IBM Cloud for Financial Services, very focused on the industry. We know the industry, we understand it with decades of experience, and making those controls built in and the level of data protection, aka confidential computing, in that context, so that customers can be more confident of moving sensitive and confidential data to the cloud.
Really, you mentioned data privacy, and what we are really seeing, there's a lot of storm around data privacy these days, and a lot of debates around how do organizations ensure data privacy. And there is still, the clarity around the data privacy laws, especially in India. There's not much clarity around it, and that is something organizations really need to focus on building. However, at the core of this is digital trust, but a trust deficit can actually hamper new digital services and innovations from flourishing. So how crucial is building trust for business success in the digital first world, and how can organizations leverage confidential computing to build that trust in the digital world?
It's interesting. You're talking about trust, and earlier you were asking about, like, you also pointed out zero trust. It's a very excellent space we are in. It's very fascinating, right? At the same time, we are at a tipping point from a technology perspective and regulatory perspective. It's not about just trust. It goes beyond. It's about transparency and also exclusive control. It's the accountability. The buck stops at the enterprise, right? So from that perspective, when you look at that, if you take Daimler as an example, they want to make sure their data is their data. IBM's strategy, policy, and what we stand behind is customers' data is yours. We don't process it. We don't share it with others, right? Like others do. From that angle, not only our policy, all the way to technology like confidential computing, with that, we are enabling the possibility for customers like Daimler to make sure their data, they can control it. Another interesting use case in sub-Saharan Africa is Irene Energy, where they're processing micropayments, subcontracts, like smart contracts, etc., when they just need to pay for that 1 hour of electricity. And they don't want to trust any cloud provider. So they came to us because we provide confidential computing technology, so they can leverage our technology where they are in complete control of the data and nobody can get into it when data is in use, as an example. So it's kind of expanding these use cases in the new world of you need trust, at the same time you need more, how do you mitigate risk and have more transparency with the provider.
So do you have such examples of confidential computing adoption in India as well?
In India, we have been working with technology vendors, or the technology vendors who have been working with, they in turn have enterprises they work in India. But at this time, there are patterns, right? So when you look at fintech companies and digital asset custodies like blockchain and cryptocurrency, like Metaco or Ledgermatic, these are examples of digital fintech where to secure, it's an existential threat for them. They'll be out of business if their keys and data gets exposed, right? So from that perspective, these fintechs are working with us, leveraging our confidential compute hyper-protect set of services to protect their data. They are powering the banks and the financial institutions globally, and they in turn serve customers in India, for sure.
Okay. So when you said that, it is an existential data protection is an existential necessity or existential threat for organizations. I think that is true for all enterprises and not just the fintechs or the financial services.
Exactly.
So in that context, do you think there's still low awareness around confidential computing in India, and what is the level of awareness do you see or the maturity curve do you see in India around confidential computing?
Yeah, in general, the awareness of confidential computing globally, including India, is relatively low. And even if you look at the hype cycle, then it's more in the initial trigger point. When you think about confidential computing, data in use just as a technology. But in IBM's perspective, we are looking at like application level encryption, like tokenization as part of confidential computing, and key management, multi-cloud key management as a service as part of confidential computing, confidential databases, like data security as a service. All of this falls under our umbrella of confidential computing. This is where people know about key management service, But we do that in a very unique way, leveraging, powered by confidential computing, if you may kind of think about it that way, right? So our view is holistic to ultimately ensure data privacy across containers and Kubernetes environment, virtual servers, databases, key management, encryption. So from that perspective, people may know parts of it, but definitely they don't really think about that in confidential compute. So thanks for that question, because it's a good opportunity to convey, as an industry, we need to move together, because it's just not IBM. We've been working with Intel and AMD and other vendors out there in the confidential computing consortium as well, because there's awareness that we need to do and the importance of data security and privacy. And technology is here today.
Absolutely. And if you look at organizations who are looking to adopt confidential computing, how do they get started? How do they incorporate it into their whole security architecture? Do they need to really revamp their security architecture or build on top of their existing security architecture? How do they get started, and what possible roadblocks and challenges they need to avoid in this journey?
Yeah, I think the way to start is looking at it from a use case perspective. So are you looking at use cases like, hey, you need complete control of the data for enterprise data? Then confidential computing technologies like hyperprotect database or hyperprotect crypto service, what we call keep your own key. You get to keep your own key. So that's an example of a use case. Another use case is processing private PII, private identifiable information, right? Personally identifiable information. So from a PII perspective, how do you protect it? How do you encrypt even before it stores? We see a lot of requirement mitigating risk or compliance from that perspective. Another use case, like some of the emerging use cases like fintechs or the energy utility I talked about, where security is a differentiator. But another use case is there's an interesting aspect of multi-party compute, where you may not be able to deal with fraud or theft just in isolation. For example, in retail industry, there's organized crime happening, where if one retailer gets compromised, they're looking at their data and what theft is happening, how's the crime happening. But if they share data with other retailers, they're actually able to find out the criminals, right? You need to share it, apply AI, but without sharing or disclosing your sensitive data. So looking at some of these use cases is very important, because confidential computing is a means to an end to solve these tough problems, as opposed to, hey, I have confidential computing, what do I do with it, right? So I think that's very important. And you talked about the roadblock. One of the important thing is ultimately it's developers who are building applications. And developers, and in the broader sense, are not security experts. So we need to do as an industry to make sure it becomes easy for a non-security developer to consume it. So making it easy for developers is important. And so kind of that's part of building security into your design and applications is important. And that the roadblock you run into is a skill set.
So definitely, I think confidential computing is going to be very relevant in the post-COVID world, which is actually characterized by a multi-cloud environment. Seeing the relevance, do you foresee greater adoption in the Indian market over the next 1 to 2 years? And what are the industries where you see particularly relevant or particularly finding high adoption rates?
From a post-COVID, the lessons we have learned, I think cloud adoption is on the increase, very, very clear. And in that context, as they want to expand more, they want to apply that to more, the customers want to apply that to more and more of their applications that deal with confidential and sensitive data. If you look at that trajectory, data protection, data privacy, and therefore confidential compute, as IBM, we describe it, that includes data at rest, in motion, in use, everything with complete control, what we call total privacy assurance, right? So that you can be assured that it's your data. That is going to change. They may not even know that they are using confidential compute under the covers if they don't need to, right? So first, cloud adoption is definitely increasing for that confidential sensitive data, confidential computing. So we see, and we will see more wider adoption of this in the coming years, in globally and in India, especially when it comes to confidential and sensitive data.
Absolutely. So to sum up, can you wrap it up with one or two best practices that you would like to suggest for CISOs who are planning to get onto this journey of confidential computing?
Yeah. I mean, when we look at even broadly as getting onto a cloud journey, a secure journey to cloud, I would say there are kind of think about it as four key areas and focus. One is you need to have prescriptive controls, mapping, manage risk and compliance. Because what happens is CISOs have policies, application developers may not understand it all the way to technology, but mapping that to prescriptive control. This is what we do with IBM Cloud for Financial Services and Controls Framework. Then from in terms of technology and capabilities, on one side, it's about data-centric protection with zero trust architectures. So it's about protection, but not, hey, put the firewalls around it and you're good. No longer true. So take a data center. What happens with confidential data, sensitive data, public data? Different technologies and levels of risk need to be addressed. At the same time, moving to more of a continuous detection and response. 90-95% of the issues and incidents that are happening are because of misconfigurations, continuously doing it in detecting and responding to it. All of that underpinned with DevSecOps. Just don't think about throwing over the wall, but how can we do application from strategy, build, design, deploy, all the way to operations? So prescriptive controls, data-centric protection with zero trust, continuous detection response underpinned by infusing security and privacy with DevSecOps.
Great. I think that's really, you have put it across very well. And I'm sure that will be of great help to all the security leaders and CISOs who are looking to take up confidential computing into their security architecture. So thank you so much, Dr. Nataraj, for your time, and have a great day.
Thank you so much, Shipra, for the opportunity.